Okay, good morning. Thanks for joining us. This is the first meeting of Central Scotland Valuation Joint Board since the local government elections in May. My name's Bryan Pirie. I'm Democratic Services Manager with Falkirk Council and Assistant to the Clerk to the Joint Board. As I said just before the meeting, we're recording the meeting, and a recording will be placed on the Valuation Board's YouTube channel for public consumption. I'll run the meeting for the start until we get to the point where we appoint a convener and deputy convener, so hopefully that won't be too long. Maybe just before we get on with business, we'll just maybe do some introductions. As I said, I'm with the Clerk's office, but we have with us a number of officers of the board. We have Pete Wildman, who's the Assessor and Electoral Registration Officer.
Hi, I'm Pete Wildman, Assessor and Electoral Registration Officer.
We have Lindsay Sim, who's Treasurer.
Good morning, I'm Lindsay Sim. Nice to see you all.
And she's more than ably supported by Elizabeth Hutcheon from Claremanshire Council. Good morning, I'm Elizabeth and I'm the Management Accounting Team Leader at Claremanshire Council and support the board. And thank you. We also have Mark Docherty, who's Divisional Assessor, and this is Mark's first meeting, having joined the board just at the start of the year.
Yep, good morning everyone. As Bryan said, I've just been Divisional Assessor since 4th of April, so bear with me.
We have a second Divisional Assessor, Anne Gardner, but she's unable to join us today. I'm also supported by Sophie from Falkirk Council, who's a graduate in my team.
Hi everyone.
And in addition to officers of the board, we also have two officers from external audit. We have Mark Ferris.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm the appointed auditor for the Valuation Joint Board. Nice to see everyone.
And Amanda Barclay.
Morning. Yes, an auditor. Audit's got presenting an annual audit plan later. Nice to meet you.
Thanks. So we're the supporting cast. The main cast obviously is the elected members. So I'll maybe go through the elected members just alphabetically. If you can just introduce yourself and say which council you're from and anything else you want to add. Councillor Balsillie.
Hi everyone. I'm Donald Balsillie, Clerk Manager Council. I previously served in the Valuation Board for about 7 or 8 years. So pleased to be working with you all.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor Martha Benny from Claremanshire Council. Councillor Kenneth Earle. But that's not alphabetical.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Bryan. Hi folks, I'm Kenneth Earle, Councillor for Claremanshire. I've been in the board for, well, this will be my 4th term on the board, so about 18 years. A long time.
Go back. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, on you go.
I'll now go back to my alphabetical list and start again properly. Councillor Balfour.
Yeah, I wondered how long it would take you. Well done. Yeah, I'm Councillor Balfour. I'm Grangemouth Councillor and serving Falkirk Council.
And we met Councillor Balsillie, so we're back on track. Councillor Bissett.
Morning everyone. I serve in the Falkirk North Ward, and first time on the board, so I'm looking forward to it with the.
Councillor Deakin.
Hi, I'm Councillor Deakin. I'm born and bred on Larbert in Falkirk.
We've met Councillor Earle. Councillor Henke, is that correct pronunciation?
It's Henke.
Henke, apologies.
And that's okay. I'm still in council, just been elected, never done this before.
Thank you. Well, you're more than welcome. Councillor McGarvey.
Yeah, Paul and I actually serve the same ward, 4th and Endrick, which takes in Killern, Balfour, basically everything that stretches right into the city of Stirling itself, namely McGarvey, right down into Gargunnock. So it's a massive rural ward. newly elected, having lost more elections than I could care to imagine, some of which I've even forgotten. So yeah, so it's interesting to have been elected in this ward unexpectedly, I have to add.
You reached the promised land in the end.
Well, if Arnold Clark's hometowns are the promised land, maybe.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Brian. Councillor Alan Nimmo, Council. I think I'm probably a bit of a veteran along with Kenneth, because this is the start of my 4th term as a board member. So look forward to working with you all.
Thanks. Councillor Patrick.
Morning, Sarah Patrick. I'm another newly elected member for Falkirk South Ward. So again, this is a first time for me.
Thank you. Councillor Redmond.
Jack Redmond. I'm newly elected as a councillor for Balsillie and Larbert, which is in Falkirk.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor John Robertson. I'm the newly elected member for the Perbaise ward. I'm a member of Falkirk Council.
And last but by no means least, Councillor Watterson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm also newly elected as one of the ward councillors for Trossachs and Teeth.
Thank you. Perhaps just before we move on, there's a bit of sound leaking into when people are talking. If it's possible, could everybody switch their microphones to mute unless they're talking? And that'll cut out some of the background noise. Thank you. So that's on the agenda. That's item 1, welcome introductions. Second item is declarations, and that's just to ask any members if they've got any declarations they wish to make. They can make it now, or they can make it later on during the item. Okay. Thank you. So, with no declarations made, we move on to the first substantive report, which is item 3. Regretfully, you're probably going to hear quite a lot from me, either at this part or for a lot of the reports, if you can just bear with me. The first item is appointment of convener and deputy convener. And the report just sets out the background and the reasons why we need to appoint a convener and deputy convener, and it asks the board to make those appointments. I think there's not much more to be said about the report other than the posts are remunerated and the levels are set out in the report. For this stage, what we'll do is we'll do the appointment of the convener first. Sorry, Councillor Bissett, you've got your hand up.
Oh, it's okay, I'll hang on.
Okay, so we'll proceed to the appointment of the convener first. I'll look for nominations. We don't need seconders according to standing orders. It's just if somebody wants to nominate somebody. The process would be if we get one name, that person would be convener. If we get 2 names, we would have a vote. If we get 3 names, we would have a vote with, in that situation, if nobody gets an overall majority, the 3rd name would fall out and we'd have a second vote. If there was an equality of votes, we would draw cards. And normally we do that in a public meeting physically. I've got the pack of cards if we do that, and I would have to draw cards on members' behalf. So that's the process. We can get to that. I don't know if that's what Councillor Bissett's question was.
No, I was just going to nominate Councillor Alan Nimmo.
All right, we're on to nominations. So okay. So that's one nomination. Are there any other nom?
Yes, I would like to nominate Councillor Bryan, Deakin.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Benny.
Let me just write this down.
Sorry, Paul, could you tell me again who you're nominating?
Councillor Benny, Martha Benny.
Got you, thank you.
Brian, can I just raise a point here? Is that appropriate? I don't think Councillor Benny's actually here.
She's not here. Have you had confirmation that she'd be happy to accept the nomination? Has that been discussed?
Yes, it has.
Okay. I think in that case it's appropriate.
Okay.
Okay. So we've got 3 nominations, Councillor Nimmo, Councillor Deakin, Councillor Benny. As I said, I'll go through each member alphabetically and ask which person you wish to vote for. You only get 1 vote, and at the end of it, tally it up. If there's an absolute majority, that person would be the convener. If not, the person with the fewest votes would drop out and we would vote again. Okay, is that clear? I know that's not the same way we do it, other councils do it, but that's the board standing orders. Okay, Councillor Balfour.
You run through the names again?
Councillor Nimmo, sorry, just to read your names again. The nominations are Councillor Nimmo, Councillor Deakin, Councillor Benny.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Balfour.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Balsillie.
Nimmo.
Councillor Benny's not here. Councillor Bissett.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Earle.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Henke.
Councillor Benny.
Councillor McGarvey.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Nimmo. You're on mute, Councillor Nimmo.
Apologies, I forgot I was on mute for myself.
Councillor Patrick.
Councillor Benny.
Councillor Redmond.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Robertson.
Sorry, Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Watterson.
Councillor Benny.
Okay. This was a scenario anticipated. So we have 6 votes for Councillor Nimmo, 3 votes for Councillor Deakin, 3 votes for Councillor Benny. So in order to determine which 2 go through, I'll need to draw cards on behalf of Councillor Deakin and Councillor Benny. But it's a new pack of cards. All the jokers have been taken out. I'm afraid I can't do any sort of Hollywood shuffle, but I can shuffle the pack. Just in the order that we're nominated, I'll draw a card for Councillor Deakin and I'll draw a card for Councillor Benny. And for this, we'll have aces high. Is Councillor Earle speaking? Sorry. You're on mute.
I thought it was 6 votes for Councillor Nimmo.
That's not an absolute. That's not a majority, though.
Ah, I see.
Yep. Sorry, I should explain that. Yeah. You need an absolute majority to be nominated. Okay, so I'll draw for Councillor Deakin first. Need to remember to do this. That's
King of Spades.
King of Spades. And for Councillor Benny. That's a 6 of hearts. Maybe just as well she wasn't here to see that. So then we move on to the next stage. So that takes Councillor Nimmo through with 6 votes and Councillor Deakin. Okay, so just go back through the process again and ask for your.
Excuse me,
your
Bryan.
votes.
Could I ask both candidates to just outline a wee bit about their experience and background? That'd be helpful in this selection process. Thank you.
Yeah, if the board are content to do that, that's fine. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Bryan. Like I said at the start, this is the start of my 4th term, so I've got plenty of experience with the Joint Valuation Board, having been elected for the first time back in 2007. I take my board responsibilities seriously. I don't think I've missed any meetings over the last 15 years, and I work with my fellow board members over that period to get the best for the joint valuation service, and hopefully that will be able to continue over the next 5 years, and I look forward to working with you all. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Deakin.
So yeah, like many of you, I'm actually still new to the council, but I've been involved in reports and statistics for quite a while with university and my degree. I'm not going to say I know everything, no one does. I'm definitely here to learn still, if we all are. Every day is a school day.
You've gone mute.
You're mute again.
I thought I'm muting myself. It must be a bug catching on today. So while I'm still relatively new to the council, like many of you, I got elected for the first time this year. I have a lot of experience dealing with reports and committees and that through a variety of other stuff. University statistics, economics, all was quite a big thing for my university degree. So yeah, I'm not going to say I know everything, but I'm definitely willing to learn and work with everyone to make sure we do the best job for the Valuation Joint Board.
Thank you. Are we happy to proceed with the vote now?
Yep.
So just to remind, the votes are for Councillor Nimmo or Councillor Deakin. I'll just go back through the list of members alphabetically, and if they could indicate who they wish to vote for. So Councillor Balfour.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Balsillie.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Bryan's not here. Councillor Bissett. Councillor Deakin.
Myself.
Councillor Earle.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Henke.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor McGarvey. Hope you're on mute again.
Again. Right, I caught you in suspense there, didn't I? Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Nimmo.
Correct.
Nimmo.
Go.
Councillor Patrick.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Redmond.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Robertson.
Councillor Deakin.
And Councillor Watterson.
Councillor Nimmo.
So that is 8 votes for Councillor Nimmo and 4 votes for Councillor Deakin. So Councillor Nimmo is now the chair of the Valuation Joint Board. Congratulations.
Thanks very much, Brian. Can I maybe just say a few words before we move on to the deputy position? Okay. Just like to say thanks to the members for their support as convener. I'll aim to continue the good work of our previous conveners. Like I said before, I've now been a member of the Joint Valuation Board for 15 years. The board has never been used as a political football in that period, and again I aim to continue in the same vein in that respect. I don't think it benefits the organisation if we bring politics into it. The board is a formal body, but I'll endeavour to conduct things as informally as possible. That's what happened in the past. We did have a lot of very good discussions and debates over the agenda, and I will do my very best to allow members to have their input as much as possible, because I think that's very important. Thanks very much for the time being. Back to you, Brian.
Thank you. So with the position of convener filled, we now turn to deputy convener, and just the same process. Can I have nominations for deputy convener? I see a hand up from Councillor Balfour.
Councillor Deakin.
I see Councillor McGarvey. Did you have your hand up?
I was actually going to nominate Councillor Deakin as well.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Watterson
I'd like to nominate Councillor Benny.
and Councillor Earle. Did I see your hand up?
Yeah, nominate myself.
Is it maybe appropriate at this stage? Sorry, Councillor Watterson, do you still have your hand up, or is that a new one? You're on mute. Okay. Maybe just in mind bear in mind what we did before. If we've heard from Councillor Deakin, Councillor Benny's not with us. If Councillor Earle maybe wanted to state what his experience was.
Certainly, Chair. I've been on the, as I said at the start, I've been on the valuation board for 19 years. In fact, when Manager Council had a brief hiatus, I was a deputy chair on the valuation board as well. So, like Alan, I've been involved in a lot of debates in on the board over the years, and we may have argued, we may have debated, but we've walked out that door as a united group, and I think that's the way that this one will continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deakin, was there anything you wanted to add before we move?
No, I've been open and honest. If I get deputy, I will continue to work, learning from everyone and learning from those who have experience, because that's how we learn and grow.
Yeah.
Thank you. And sorry, Councillor Watterson, your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to speak on behalf of Martha Benny, who's actually not with us this morning because she has to sit a licensing exam, but hopes to join us later. I understand that Martha also has been on the valuation board for the last 5 years, and that is obviously valuable experience. But Martha will be joining us later as soon as her exam's over.
Thank you. Okay, with that completed, we'll move to the vote. And so just to repeat, the candidates are Councillor Deakin, Councillor Benny and Councillor Earle. So I'll go through members alphabetically again, if they could cast one vote. Councillor Balfour.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Balsillie.
Councillor Earle.
Councillor Bissett. Hi, Councillor Bissett, are you? Sorry, I couldn't quite catch that, Councillor Bissett.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Deakin.
Myself.
Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to clarify with Councillor Bissett first. You said Councillor Deakin. Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Deakin.
Myself.
Councillor Earle. I think you said yourself there, yeah. Councillor Henke.
Councillor Benny.
Councillor McGarvey.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Earle.
Councillor Patrick.
Councillor Benny.
Councillor Redmond.
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Robertson.
Sorry, Brian. Councillor Deakin.
And Councillor Watterson.
Councillor Benny.
Okay, so the votes are for Councillor Deakin, 6, for Councillor Benny, 3, for Councillor Earle, 3. So as before, I'll use cards to determine which of Councillor Benny and Councillor Earle move on to the next stage. And that's again just to repeat because Councillor Deakin didn't receive an absolute majority of votes cast. So are you happy for me to cut the cards?
Yeah.
Just inexpertly shuffle again. And again, I'll draw for Councillor Benny first, then Councillor Earle, just in the way they were nominated. So for Councillor Benny, 3 of spades. And for Councillor Earle, 8 of clubs. So Councillor Benny's eliminated from that round, and we move on to the next round where the votes will be for Councillor Deakin and Councillor Earle. Again, I'll just go through everybody's name alphabetically and ask you to cast a vote for one candidate. So for Councillor Balfour,
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Balsillie,
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Bissett,
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Deakin,
Myself.
Councillor Earle. I think I read that as yourself. Take that, thank you. Councillor Henke,
Councillor Deakin,
Councillor McGarvey,
Councillor Deakin,
Councillor Nimmo,
Councillor Earle.
Councillor Patrick,
Councillor Earle.
Councillor Redmond,
Councillor Deakin.
Councillor Robertson,
Councillor Deakin.
and Councillor Watterson.
Sorry, Councillor Earle.
That's 8 votes for Councillor Deakin and 4 votes for Councillor Earle. So that results with Councillor Deakin becoming the deputy convener. Okay, so that concludes item 3, convener. Sorry, Councillor Balfour, you get your hand up.
Yeah, just as the previous convener, I'd like to congratulate the new convener and deputy convener.
Thanks, David, and well done, Brian. Look forward to working with you.
Yep, thank you very much for all voting for me. And thank you, David. And Alan, look forward to working with you.
Brian, do you have anything else to add at this point? Or can we move on?
It's nice to see 11.
So I'm not sure which Brian you were talking to there, convener, but if it was myself, that's that item complete if you want to move on to the agenda now.
Okay, that takes us on to item 4 on the agenda, the Central Scotland Valuation Joint Board membership. Brian, you're going to give us an update in relation to this? It's pages 7 to 10 in the agenda.
Yes, thank you. This is just a standard report that we put up at the first meeting, which sets out the membership of the board. There's 8 members from Falkirk Council, 4 members from Stirling and 3 members from Clackmannanshire appointed. Now, as we currently stand, Falkirk Council still has to determine which of its independent members will be on the board, and Stirling similarly has to determine which of its places will be taken by an SNP member. So we're not quite at full membership. We've got 13 out of the 15 places filled. But the report's just for information, but I think maybe importantly, moving on, this is an opportunity right at the start to appoint members to 2 of the committees that the board may use during its lifetime. It's not absolutely certain that we'll need an appointments committee or indeed an appeals committee. We recently, as mentioned earlier, had a new divisional assessor. In fact, with 2 new divisional assessors appointed by the previous appointments committee. So it's not anticipated. I don't think that we'll be needing an appointments committee, but it's good practice just at the start to establish these committees. So we have an appeals committee, sorry, which comprises of 3 members, and that's 1 from each authority. So at this stage, I'm just going to ask if any members want to put themselves forward to be on the appeals committee.
Brian, do you need a chair for both of these committees first?
The appeals committee there's no set requirement that it has to be the convener, but it could be the convener if you want to put yourself forward for that, and it might be quite appropriate. It's not a requirement, whereas in the appointments committee we have the convener and the deputy convener already on as ex officio members. But if you think it would be appropriate for the appeals committee,
I'd be quite happy to chair that as convener.
so do we have any nominations or voluntary hands up for a member from Stirling and a member from Clacks for the appeals committee?
I'll do it. Stirling.
Yeah. And from Clacks? What we can do, if there's a vacant place, we can look to fill that.
Sorry, Brian, did you pick that up? I put my name down for it.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Thank you very much.
No problem. I might have to switch it off and switch back on because I'm having some difficulty with sound this morning.
Okay, thanks. Well, we'll see how so the next committee, it's appointments, and we have the convener, the deputy convener on that. So there's 3 places still to be filled, and I think the proportion in the past was 3 from Falkirk, 1 from Stirling, and 1 from Clacks, just to keep proportionality. So would there be any member from, first of all, from Falkirk willing to sit in the appointments committee? Councillor Bissett, you've got your hand up.
I'll sit in the appointments committee, Brian.
Okay, and a member from Stirling and a member from Clacks?
I'll do Stirling.
Like Councillor Henke?
Yeah.
And from Clacks? Thank you. And you could be on both, just in case MD was thinking you could one or the other. So if anybody from Clacks wanted to put themselves forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that's Councillor Nimmo, Councillor Deakin, Councillor Bissett, Councillor Henke, and Councillor Earle.
Yep.
So that and that's all that was required for that report, convener. We've noted the appointments to the board and we've appointed the appeals and appointments committee.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Brian. That's quite straightforward. That takes us on to item 5 on the agenda. That's going to be a presentation from Peter. Over to you, Peter.
Okay, morning everybody. Thought it perhaps be helpful just to give a brief overview of the role of the Valuation Joint Board and what the Assessor and Electoral Registration Officer service does. So if you bear with me, I'll just share my screen. Everybody can see that. We've already done introductions, but I think it's probably just worth noting the officers of the board. So there are 3 officers to the board: the clerk, who's Colin Moody, myself as assessor, and the treasurer, Lindsay Sim, who's the Section 95 officer for the board as well. I also want to mention the management team that supports me in my role, and that is the 2 divisional assessors, Mark Docherty, who's at the meeting, and Anne Gardner, who's on leave. Anne's just joined us, and her leave was pre-planned before she joined the Valuation Joint Board. And the 4th member of the management team is Andy Hunter, who's the Principal Admin Officer and Deputy Electoral Registration Officer. There are 14 assessors across Scotland. They work either for one council or a combination of authorities. Where the assessor works just for one council, they form a service within the council. In examples like ourselves, where the assessor's function covers 3 council areas, a Valuation Joint Board is established, and the Valuation Joint Board is the valuation authority for that area. So what are the duties of the Assessor and Electoral Registration Officer? Firstly is valuation for non-domestic rating, so have to maintain the valuation role, which basically includes all properties unless they're specifically excluded. The main exclusions are domestic property, public parks and agricultural properties. The last revaluation was on 1st of April 2017. The next revaluation is fast approaching on the 1st of April 2023, and then revaluations move to 3 yearly after that. Prior to that, the revaluations were 5 yearly. There should have been a revaluation in 2022, but it got postponed because of the pandemic to 2023. As well as being the Assessor for Central Scotland Valuation Joint Board, I'm also the designated Assessor for Docks and Harbours. So that means where ports cover more than one valuation area, I become responsible for them. There are therefore 3 entries in the Falkirk valuation role, 1 for Calmac, 1 for Clyde ports and 1 for Forth ports. Other types of designated, so my colleague in Dunbartonshire is responsible for gas undertakings across Scotland, a colleague in Lanarkshire is responsible for electricity and so on. The other thing I'm responsible for is banding all the maintenance of the valuation list. So that is the council tax list with a band for every domestic property in the valuation area. And finally, I'm appointed by the 3 councils to be electoral registration officer, and therefore I'm responsible for the registration of all electors across the 3 council areas. And that includes now anybody who's legally resident in Scotland and is aged 14 or over. So just a few facts and figures to set some sort of framework for the board. The valuation role has got 13,340 entries. A rateable value in excess of 347 million. It ranges in size, so the biggest subjects we've got are the petrochemical works down at Grangemouth, but then you'll go down to small huts and bothies in rural areas, so it's a complete gambit of property. It actually makes the job incredibly interesting because you deal with a huge variety of properties and deal with stuff that probably never comes onto market and is never valued so in any other context, so it makes the job very rewarding. There are 148,000 entries in the valuation list for council tax. Excuse me. And when we published the register on the 1st of December 21, there were 236,000 local government electors in the area. In terms of employees, there's just under 50 of us. We're all based at Hillside House. However, at the moment we're operating, and I suspect we will continue to do so. We've just done a staff survey that has come back positive in respect of hybrid working. So currently people are working approximately is equivalent to 40% of the time in the office, so 2 days a week or 4 days over or 8 days over a 4-week period. So what are the core activities? Valuation role, it's really adding new properties, valuing any changes to properties. So when a property is altered, the rateable value is amended. We also deal with the appeals arising. So whenever we put out a new valuation role, that generates appeals against the valuation decisions we've made. And also, so at the last reval, we had 4,500 appeals lodged. We've also had 5,800 appeals lodged on the grounds of the pandemic. Has it had an adverse effect on the value of properties? I should explain that the value, the rateable value, is my opinion of the rental value of the property as at a fixed date. And as I mentioned before, we revalue properties every 3 years. It is a similar workload for the council tax list. We have fewer proposals at the moment, but when the list first came in, and some of us are long enough to remember, and some of us long enough to remember it coming in 1993, there were a significant number of proposals lodged at that point. And finally, there's Electoral Register, where we do a canvass once a year. We also invite people to register. If we know somebody's at the property and isn't on the register, we'll invite them to register. So we get sources, partly the canvass, but also council tax lists, university lists, school lists, and also lists of eligible prisoners from Scottish Prison Service. And we maintain the absent vote list. So that's lists of people who are eligible to vote by post or by proxy. The post is statutory post. And one thing I need to be clear is that the valuation function is a personal responsibility to me, and the same for the electoral registration function. It is not a function of the board. The duties sit with me personally, and I'm answerable for the decisions in respect of the valuation roll, the valuation list, and the register of electors. The board appoints me to carry out the valuation functions, and the deputy assessors are also appointed by the same board and have the same statutory rights and duties in respect to the valuation role as I do, and the valuation list. And by law, the assessor and the deputy assessors must be chartered surveyors. And in fact, all our qualified staff from valuer grade upwards are chartered surveyors. So they've got the skills and expertise necessary to value the property. And as I mentioned before, I'm also appointed the electoral registration officer by the 3 councils. So who am I answerable to? I'm answerable to the valuation joint board for the running of the service, but not for valuation matters or whether a registration is correct. So if somebody is unhappy with the valuation I put on a property, they have a right of appeal to the courts on that. In the same way, if somebody is not happy that I've not included them on the register of electors, they can challenge my decision to the courts. So the board can't direct me in valuation matters. The board can't get involved in how I value properties. That is not the remit of the board. That's something I'm personally responsible for and answer to the courts for my decisions on those matters. So what's the valuation joint board responsible? First of all, it's an independent body. It's independent of the 3 councils. Its role is to ensure that I'm adequately funded, so I've got sufficient funds to carry out my duties, but also to scrutinise, and that's a really important function of the board, is to scrutinise what I'm doing, to make sure I'm using those funds properly, and also that I'm actually carrying out my duties. So you will find that I will report to you, and there's some reports in this board as to performance, as to how we're getting on with appeals. There will also be reports on electoral registration matters. And finally, and I think it's a really important role of the board, is to provide governance as well as scrutiny, is also to provide governance to the board, but also leadership in terms of financial and employment matters. At the end of the day, it's the board who is the employer, and it is the board that sets the ethos and the tone of the valuation authority. And so you will find I will present valuation HR policies to yourselves for approval and look to you for guidance on HR matters in terms of policy and direction. And finally, as I mentioned before, to appoint the assessor and statutory deputies. As I mentioned before, there are 14 assessors, and we work closely together through the Scottish Assessors Association. The SAA has existed since 1854 in one form or another. It's non-statutory, but it's recognised by both the Scottish and UK governments as an important source of advice. I'm currently Vice President of the Association and will be President between 23 and 25. I'm also currently Chair of the Electoral Registration Committee. And it performs several functions, and these are really important ones. It harmonises valuation practice. So a supermarket, whether it's in central Scotland, whether it's in Lothian, whether it's in Glasgow, is all valued on the same basis in the same way to ensure consistency of approach. We also meet regularly with our colleagues who head up the valuation office in England and Wales, Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland to make sure that we are to learn from each other and to compare how we approach valuation matters. And finally, as I mentioned before, there's a coordination of electoral registration practice in Scotland and a point of contact with the UK and Scottish governments and the Electoral Commission. And as well as being chair of the Electoral Registration Committee, I'm also a member of the Electoral Management Board for Scotland. And I think this is the key one. It allows sharing of resources and expertise between assessors' offices. So rather than 14 assessors each coming up with a valuation practice note for licensed premises or for supermarkets or for universities, we all take a share of that workload. So for instance, my colleagues in Lothian will write the scheme of value for supermarkets. Here in central Scotland, We take responsibility for subjects such as universities, and my colleague Mark, who's on the call, is practice note author of universities and will provide a recommended scheme of value for the whole of Scotland for the approach to the valuation of universities. So we are working jointly and in partnership to spread the financial and workload between us. I won't go through all these bodies, but there's some of the bodies that act as a single point of contact. So as I mentioned, I'm chair of the Electoral Registration Committee. So if there's any query regarding electoral registration or general approach in Scotland, it will come to me in first instance, and then I'll liaise with my fellow electoral registration officers. We have a common website, saa.gov.uk. This has grown. When it first was set up in 2005, it was really simply the valuation roll and valuation list online. You can now do interactive transactions. The vast majority of appeals against either council tax bans or valuation roll entries are made online. You can return information online. We provide a history of the rateable values for a subject. We also, for the most, currently for shops, offices and workshops, will provide a copy of the valuation. That's about 2/3 of the entries in the valuation roll. That is being expanded at the 23 reval to include subjects such as schools, halls, and other categories of subjects, so that far more valuations will be available. We also provide practice notes so that people can see how we value the property. When I first joined in 1991, these things were highly confidential. I had to actually sign for my first practice notes, so I wouldn't release them. And we're now in a situation where they're there published, which is correct. It's important that the service and the valuation function is open and transparent as to how decisions are raised, so that ratepayers and taxpayers can understand how we've arrived at their property assessment. So looking ahead, what's coming? There is a lot coming in the next 12 months. I've been assessed since 2014, and this is one of the biggest periods of change arriving in the next 12 months. We've got the move from 5-yearly to 3-yearly revaluations. We've got a new proposal and appeal system coming in from the 1st of January 2023. The local valuation appeal committees that currently sit will disappear at that point, and the work will transfer to the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service. There's some changes around public parks. So currently, if a public park is vested in the control of a local authority or a Crown body and does not make a profit, then it doesn't go in the roll. Where items of the public park are not open for free, unrestricted access, so for instance, tennis courts or football pitches, which you have to book and pay, these will now, from the 1st of April 23, appear in the valuation roll. We're, for the first time, going to have to publish a draft valuation roll. Up until this revaluation, we've simply published a final roll as at the 1st of April and issued valuation notices. We're going to have to publish a draft roll as at the 30th of November this year and issue notices at that point, and again when we publish roll. As I mentioned before, more valuations information published online. There are also changes coming on the electoral registration front. So the UK government has announced its intention to introduce voter identity at UK parliamentary elections. The Scottish government have indicated they will not be following suit for Scottish parliamentary and local government elections. But the plan is from December this year, applications will arrive in our office and we will have to process people who want voter identity cards. The quantity of people needing it is unknown. It's estimated that only 2% of the population don't have photo ID of some sort. So items such as passports, driving license will be acceptable photo ID at the polling station, but anybody who doesn't have one of those, or a bus pass, that type of entitlement card, will be able to apply to us for a voter ID card. And the plan is for any parliamentary elections or by-elections from May 23 onwards, UK parliamentary that is, voters will need to produce voter ID at the point when they cast their ballot. There are also changes coming on postal vote and proxy vote rules, which I won't go into huge detail, and an expansion of overseas electors franchise. They come in June 23, so again within this 12-month period. And finally, locally, The lease on our offices at Hillside House expires on the 31st of May 2023, and we're currently investigating options as to whether to stay here and downsize within the building or whether to move to alternative accommodation. And in due course, I will bring a report forward to the Valuation Joint Board for your guidance and steer on which direction we go in terms of accommodation going forward from June 2023 onwards. That is a brief run through of what the board is, functions within the organisation. And I'll pause there, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much for that, Peter. A very detailed and appropriate presentation there, and it helps to set the scene going forward for the next 5 years. Before I open it up to questions from members, can I just ask members to indicate using the top toolbar, if you could put your hand up, just so I can see who's actually wanting to come in. Is there any questions for Peter in relation to the presentation at this point? No, Peter, it looks like you're getting let off lightly. There's nobody indicating so far, so if there's nobody wanting to ask anything, we'll move on. Item 6 is the minute of the meeting held on the 4th of March this year. That's page 11 to 18 in your agenda. Bryan, can you just keep me right as to who was in attendance at that meeting so that we can move and second the minutes?
Thanks. Well, this is open for the entire board to approve as a correct record, so it's not only the people who were there at the time, it's all the members. But just on that one, if the people who were there maybe want to, as you're suggesting, give an indication that it's correct. Councillor Balfour, Earle, yourself are the only members who were there that are currently on the board.
I'm happy to move it as a true record, but I'll open it up to any questions from members. No, no questions. Bryan, I think that's agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
And the second one then, it would be Councillor Balfour and Councillor Earle that were there for the appointments committee.
Councillor Balfour, Councillor Earle, will you get any points to raise in relation to this one, or any other member for that matter?
No.
No. Okay, Bryan, that's fine.
Yep.
That takes us on to item 7 on the agenda, the 2021-22 internal audit review. That's pages 21 to 35 in your agenda, and I believe it's the internal audit manager. Is that Amanda that's covering this one?
The internal audit manager is Isabel Wright from Falkirk Council, and she's unfortunately unable to be with us today. She's recovering from a minor operation, so I don't know whether it's foolishly, but she's asked me to cover her report and the subsequent reports on the agenda. So there's a little bit more of me at this meeting, convener.
Okay.
I'll be very brief on the background, and then perhaps if there's questions, they could be directed to the assessor on the outcome of the reports. But this report's just presenting that the findings from the 21-22 internal audit reviews of the board, which were of records management plan and the annual governance statement assurance questionnaire. The reports from these reviews are attached as Appendix 1, and from the work that was carried out on these reviews, the internal auditor is able to provide substantial assurance from both these. There was some recommendations made, however, as a result of the work. There was 4, and these are set out at page 30 of the report, and these are aimed at improving the framework of control, and these have been agreed by the assessor. So I think the key thing is that there was two audits that have been carried out in terms of the work plan. The reports are attached, and there was 4 recommendations, all of which have been agreed by the assessor. And with that in mind, convener, the board is asked to just note the findings at this stage. But of course, if there's any questions on the findings or the action plan, we'd be happy to try and answer questions.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Bryan. Any questions from members in relation to this report? No, there's nobody indicating. Are that's fine. We'll note that, Brian. That takes us on to item 8. That's the internal audit annual assurance report for 21-22, and that's page 36 to 40 in your agenda. Brian, you covering this one as well?
I will do, thanks. And this is an important piece of work by internal audit. Based on the work that they carried out during the year, internal audit is able to provide substantial assurance on the adequacy of the board's arrangements for risk management, governance and control. And this is an important conclusion by the internal auditor at the end of the financial year. This feeds into the accounts which come up later. So basically this report just explains what work's been done and the fact that substantial assurance can be provided to the board on the board's risk management and financial governance and control framework. So again, happy to answer any questions, or more than happy if there's any questions for Pete.
Okay, thanks very much, Brian. Any questions from members in relation to this report? No indications again, Brian. That takes us on to item 9, the revenue budget 21-22. Elizabeth, I believe you're taking this one. Sorry, Donald, did you want in?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. And I'm being slow because this probably relates back to the last item. I was just wondering if Mark or Amanda, in terms of our external auditors, can give us any advice in terms of the lack of assurance on risk assessment. If either of those individuals could give us an assessment on that.
Brian, are you able to pick this up? And
so could maybe just, Councillor Balsillie, just repeat the question again, please? Is it to do with, you say, lack of assurance? I think the report sets out that there was substantial assurance.
I think it was an item, really sorry. Let's just say I'm fairly new to this, so I think it was actually item 7, where there was no assurance in terms of risk assessment getting carried out. And I was a little bit concerned about that. I was wondering if somebody could sort of make a statement in that.
I'm not reading it. I read that for both reviews, substantial assurance was provided. So for the overall reviews, in each case, substantial assurance was provided. Is there a page number you could direct us to?
It's okay. I'm misreading the report. I apologise to the committee for that.
That's okay, Donald, no problem.
That's okay, no problem. Thank you.
Right, so that takes us back to item 9, the revenue budget. Elizabeth, you're picking this one up?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. This report provides the board with the draft financial position for the year ending 31st of March 2022. The 21-22 annual revenue budget was 2.966 million, and this report shows a budget to actual underspend of 232,000 for 21-22. This is a favourable movement of 24,000 since the December forecast, which was reported to the board in March 2022. Table A provides the detailed variances discussed above, and the majority of the underspend relates to employee costs, which is 167,000. This mainly relates to delays in recruitment to vacancies. The balance of 67,000 of the underspend is spread across supplies and services. Table B provides details of the variance movement of £24,000. An update on the closing reserves position is included in the draft annual accounts, which is on the agenda following this. The board are asked to consider and comment on the paper, and myself and officers are happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that report there, Elizabeth. Peter's already alluded to the fact that this is going to be a very busy 12-month period coming up. I'm a bit concerned regarding the budget forecast going forward. Are we going to have sufficient funds to cover everything that we're actually anticipating doing? It's maybe a question for Peter rather than yourself, Elizabeth.
I think the funding is there. The challenge for us is actually staffing and recruitment, as Elizabeth alluded to. The predominant reason for the underspend last year was vacancies, and in common with all assessor services across Scotland, we're experiencing a high volume of staff churn, and however quickly you move to recruit and to fill vacancies, I think delay is probably not quite the right word in the report. It is more down to just it takes time to recruit and you end up with a period of vacancy. That means we underspend on our staffing budget. We are also, as I said, our budgeted position should be that we should have 6 qualified valuers. We don't have any qualified valuers. We have senior valuers, we have principal valuers, and we have divisional assessors. Those levels are filled. But at valuer level, at entry level qualified chartered surveyors, we are really struggling to recruit. And even we have a number of trainees in post, but then you find that trainees, when they qualify, can move on. So although you spent the time training, they then move on for something else. So it is a risk. It's something we're managing. So whilst the board is seeing some financial benefit, there is a downside to that financial benefit because we haven't got the staffing establishment that we would like. But at this stage, I'm not I wouldn't say I'm not concerned, but I don't think there is a significant risk to the board in terms of delivery of its functions at this point in time. But it is something I will keep under review, and once a year I present a risk report to the board, and staffing is one of the major risks for us.
Thanks very much for the explanation there, Peter. Donald, do you still want in? You were indicating there that you wanted to speak.
No, I'm sorry, Alan. That was a legacy hand. I'm not doing very well this morning. I do have a question in accounts, but it's a very small issue, and I'll wait till others have addressed some of the more substantial issues. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Any questions or comments from members in relation to this report? No, there's no Ben indicating. Okay, we'll move on to item 10. Sorry.
Can I come in then, Alan? And it's a tiny wee thing, but I note that the hospitality budget has been well spent in terms of just over about £1,500, but it was during COVID, so I'm just curious what that was spent on. I know it's a small number compared to the overall spend we're talking about, but I'm just curious about that particular issue. Thank you.
Okay, Elizabeth, can you maybe update us on that?
Donald, sorry, where are you seeing that? Because I'm seeing underspends in cleaning, hospitality, utilities. Are you seeing it in the detailed report?
Yeah, it's on page 48. You've got hospitality, a budget of a modest budget of 1,750, but 1,490 was actually spent. But given that we were in the COVID lockdown, I'm just curious what that hospitality was spent on.
I would say mainly meeting room hires. You know, it covers a plethora of things, but I can certainly get the detail for you on that. I can give you a breakdown on it.
Yeah, and
can you maybe give us some information on this?
Yeah, we really haven't spent any hospitality at all in the last. I will double check with Elizabeth on that, but certainly, you know, we normally the office is often used to be used by the SA as a central meeting point, and therefore we tended to provide coffee and biscuits and sandwiches, but people actually paid for that. So there's a income going out and money going out and income coming in. But in lockdown, we really haven't spent anything on hospitality at all.
It's maybe just the header, and that's where we've coded things. We can have a wee look at it, and what I'll do is I'll come back through Bryan and issue a breakdown of that so that it can be sent out to the board.
Okay, Donald, are you happy with that?
Yes, I am, Alan. I'm sorry for it's such a minor thing compared to the big budget, but it's just one of these things that flag up, you know.
That's okay.
Maybe it wasn't Boris Johnson that was having big parties. I didn't hear
it was me
coming from the board offices, but I'm just curious about that particular one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Donald. David, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Page 43. Disaster recovery, there's an increase in the monthly costs. Can you give us a wee bit more information on that?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
It'll be
Peter? One of the two.
Sorry, probably myself. One of the things is we've been moving to digitized records. We've also moved to home working. Therefore, the volume of space that we're actually holding data for has increased significantly. The board has servers that are physically based in premises, but also we have an offsite backup, and we've had to increase the amount of storage that we're using on the offsite backup, and therefore it reflects the increase in spend.
You okay with that, David? Okay, if there's not any further questions in relation to item 9, we'll move on. Item 10 is the draft annual accounts for 21-22. Elizabeth, are you taking this one as well?
No, it's Lindsay.
Lindsay. Okay, Lindsay.
Thank you. The board has a statutory obligation to prepare a statement of accounts and present these for audit to the appointed external auditor by the 30th of June each year. The draft annual accounts must then be considered by the board within 2 months of this date. So this paper therefore presents the board's draft annual accounts for the financial year ended 31st March 2022 for the board to consider. As noted in the previous report, the draft outturn for the year is an underspend of 232,000, and a breakdown of this across expenditure categories is also provided at Appendix 1 of this report. After accounting for the accounting adjusting entries, this results in an increase in reserves for the year of 104,000, and that results in total closing reserves for the board of 622,000. Of the total reserves figure, 350,000 are committed for specific purposes, and these are detailed in the report, and that leaves an uncommitted balance of 272,000. So this level of uncommitted reserves is slightly above the minimum level of between 3 and 6% of net expenditure, and this will be reviewed during the year. The following paper on the agenda sets out the external auditor's audit plan, and then after completion of the audit, the audited annual accounts will be brought back to the board for approval. So I'm happy to take any questions on the report. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Lindsay, for that. Any questions or comments from members? No, there's nobody indicating that they want to come in. Okay, happy with that. That takes us on to item 11, the annual audit plan for 21-22. Who's picking this one up? Bryan, who's dealing with this one?
The reports by the Treasurer.
Sorry, if I could pass on to either Mark or Amanda, the external auditors, to present their audit plan, which forms this report.
Morning. Sorry, I just had difficulty getting my camera and my mic on in time there. So yes, I'll just provide a short summary of our annual audit plan, and then I'll take any questions that you may have on it. So the report provides you with the detail of our proposed work for the 2021-2022 financial audit. It provides a summary of the risks that we've identified through our planning stage of our audit and the intended work that we're going to undertake. It also details our audit fee, proposed timetable for the audit, and the respective responsibilities of the board, the treasurer, and the appointed auditor. I'm not going to go through the report in detail, but there's several areas that I'd like to highlight within the report. So exhibits 2 and 3, which are on pages 127 and 130 of your papers, outline the risks that we identified through our audit, our planning work. So we categorise those into financial risks and wider dimension risks. And for each of these, we've outlined the work that we intend to undertake to address these and the management assurances that we've received. If you want to see pages 131 and 132 outline our reporting arrangements for the audit. And Exhibit 5 has a timetable for the audit work, which allows us to sign off the financial statements by the deadline of the 30th of September. And then paragraph 32 on page 133 details our agreed audit fee for the year. That's the main points from the plan, but if there's anything that you want clarified, any additional points or any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Over to members, any questions or comments? No, there's no indications. Okay, we'll move on to item 12. That's the internal audit plan 22-23. Now, is that Mark that's taking this one?
No, that's me again. That's the internal audit plan. So this is the report by Isabel again, convener. So This report is the kind of companion piece to the external audit report. This sets out the work that internal audit will do over the forthcoming year. And again, the findings of this will feed into the assurance statement, which again feeds into the following year's accounts. So it's recommended by internal audit they carry out two audits. One is the follow-up on recommendations outstanding, and page 137 just shows you there's a number of recommendations outstanding, which they will just go back and just review. And the second one is on governance, and that's the challenge and conclusions reached by the assessor in completing the annual governance statement. Those are the two main pieces of work. In addition, there is the scope for ad hoc consultancy and advice to be provided, but that's the main two planks of the internal audit plan for the year, and the board is asked to agree the work plan.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Over to members for any comments or questions. No, I don't see any indications. No, we'll move on. That takes us on to item 13. That's the best value report 21-22. I think it's Mark this time, Divisional Assessor, that's taking this one.
Yes, good morning. The best value report, it shows the assessor's performance in terms of key performance indicators, KPIs, for both valuation roll and council tax in the last financial year. Looking firstly at the valuation roll, the KPI is a measure of the length of time it takes to action amendments to the roll. You can see from table 2.3 the targets set, and in 2.4 the actual achieved. Targets were not met in the last financial year due to operating difficulties experienced during the pandemic. Moving on to the valuation list, the table at 2.6 shows the targets set, and 2.7 shows the figures achieved. You can see that for council tax all the targets were met. And moving on to 2.8, the targets for the current financial year are proposed. The proposal is to adopt the same targets as last year. They acknowledge the challenging circumstances ahead, particularly in connection with the preparation of the 2023 revaluation. And finally, the recommendation is that the board consider and comment on our continuing commitment to best value. Happy to take any questions in relation to that report.
Thanks very much, Mark. Over to board members for any comments or questions. Again, I don't see any indications. We'll move on to item 14. It's the Valuation Appeals Progress Report. Mark, is that yourself again?
It is indeed, yes. The Valuation Appeals Progress Report lets members see the progress that's been made in the last financial year. Just by way of introduction, I've noted the total number of appeals received since the 2017 revaluation. We also have a small number of appeals outstanding from previous revaluations in 2005 and 2010. You can, at point 2, you can see from the table that revaluation appeal progress continues, and we have disposed of 98% of all appeals. Of the 4,575 appeals lodged, there's only 90 remaining, and they have all been referred to the Lands Tribunal. We have scheduled hearings to deal with appeal work every month right up until the end of the year. As Peter has already alluded to earlier, there's a brand new 2-stage appeal system being introduced, coinciding with the transfer of appeal work from valuation panels to the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service. Moving on at 3 to running roll appeals, which are appeals that have been made during the current roll against new or altered entries. You can see from the table at 3.7 the extraordinary number of running roll appeals received mainly in relation to the pandemic and its effect on rateable values. The Scottish Government has recently introduced legislation which requires the assessor to ignore COVID when assessing values from the 2nd of April 2020, and this legislation will hopefully assist with the disposal of a great number of these appeals. In terms of the 25 and 2010 outstanding appeals, excellent progress has been made in the disposal of these appeals, with only 5 remain outstanding. Moving on to council tax proposal and appeals at item 5. 1,154 new houses were added to the valuation list in the last year. We received 96 appeals, of which 81 were dealt with. You can see from the table, we have a relatively small number of appeals outstanding and in a good position to dispose of these appeals ahead of the transfer of appeal work to the tribunal service next year. And just finally, the recommendations are that the board consider and comment on the significant appeal workload arising from the 27 revaluation and the progress, and in particular progress in the disposal of appeals relating to the 25 and 2010 revaluations, and also the disposal of council tax proposals and appeals.
Thanks again, Mark, for the report. It's open to members to comment or ask any questions of Mark in relation to this. I don't see any indications again. Okay, I agree with that. That takes
so
us
hang on a second, hang on, I'm sorry, I was on mute there. I was wanting to ask Mark, although I can appreciate the figures and I also appreciate the context for the re-evaluation in 2017, what surprises me is the significant rise, I'm looking at 2.1 at this point, from 2018 through 22, with the appeals stats basically. It's not so much the disposal of, but really the figures, significant rise in figures actually landing on your desks. So is there a kind of undercurrent or point I'm missing apart from the fact it was re-evaluation? Were there more properties on the market following re-evaluation, or what's the context?
But as far as re-evaluation appeals are concerned, the way it works is that in 2017 there's a statutory time period to appeal your new assessment in 2017. As you can see, we received thousands of those appeals, but after the statutory deadline, no one can make a re-evaluation appeal. So what you find at 2.1 is the disposal rate increasing as the quinquennium goes through. So we dispose of 22% in the first year, and it jumps up and up and up to, we're now at the stage where we've dealt with 98% of those appeals. But on the other hand, and I think, Councillor, that what you're referring to is the other appeal, the running roll appeals that we have at 3.7. Now, you can see that running roll appeals cover all sorts of things. We make new entries in the valuation roll. They can be appealed. There can be demolitions, extensions, all that sort of thing, which we take account of. They can be appealed as well. All sorts of material change of circumstances, but the main, the extraordinary amount that we have received is purely down to COVID and the effects of the pandemic. As you can see, there's nearly 6,000 appeals, which is out of the ordinary for a normal revaluation cycle. Does that answer the question?
I think so, but you'll appreciate I'm coming at this completely clean and new. So I'm not entirely sure. What I was looking for basically was the unpacking of some of the data. That was all.
Yeah.
So that'll keep me happy in the meantime.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gerry. If there's no further comments, sorry, Donald, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, the outstanding appeals going back to 2010 under 4.2, page 149. Are you at liberty to tell us what those two cases are? They look to be quite substantial, over £1 million each, maybe.
Well, yes. One of the appeals is the Glassworks appeal, and it's almost, that must take up, I think it's 1.8 million or 1.88 million or thereabouts. So there's only two appeals, one of which Glassworks, and I can report that I have had in discussions recently with the agent for the proprietor of the glassworks, and he is keen to get that appeal disposed of over the summer months. The problem being with a lot of things, Councillor, is that agents have been unable to access properties because of the pandemic, and survey work is, absolutely ground to a halt at one point, and it's only now that survey work's being allowed, and in some cases, some of the bigger the bigger subjects we're still finding difficult to actually get access for survey. But I do believe that the agent, in the case of the glassworks, is attempting to survey this summer, and we're hoping to get that 2010, the 2010 appeal settled in the very near future.
And the other appeal is?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I don't know if Pete might.
No, I'm afraid off the top of my head I don't, but we can certainly get that information to you. Yeah. Just coming back on the Glassworks appeal, one of the issues for us was the provision of costs in relation to furnace linings, and the agent hadn't provided us, which delayed the process as well. There's also been a change of agent as well between the agent that originally lodged the 2010 appeal and the one that's now dealing, and as Mark alluded to, the new agent now needs to do a survey. So these things are, it's not that they're not progressing, it's sometimes these things, in particular on these large subjects, can take quite a time to resolve.
Okay, thanks for that. Obviously very complex and in my own backyard, as it were, in Alloa, so good, interesting, thank you.
Thanks for the question there, Donald. If there's not any further comments or questions, I'm going to move on now to the last item, item 15, the programme of meetings for the future. Brian, I believe you're taking this. Can you maybe just also highlight at the same time the future of our virtual meetings and whether we're going to revert back to physical face-to-face?
Excuse me, absolutely. That's partly what the report's going to look at. So, yeah, the first part of the report, as you say, is the programme of meetings. And it's really just a programme of meetings from now till the end of the year. I will bring a report to the September meeting, which is the programme of meetings for next year. So this is just between now and the end of the year. It's proposed there's going to be 2 meetings. One will be on Friday, the 30th of September, and that's primarily scheduled to allow the accounts. We had the draft accounts this morning. This is to bring the finalised audited accounts, which the board has to consider and approve by the 30th of September. So we're proposing the board meets on Friday the 30th of September, and the final meeting of the year would be Friday 25th of November. Both of these would be at 9:30 AM. That's the traditional start time for the board. So I think the first part is just to ask the board to agree that those are the dates it wishes to meet. The second part is, as you mentioned, convener, is the meeting arrangements. Prior to COVID, the board, like all authorities, met physically, and the board met in Hillside House in Stirling, and that's where the meetings were conducted. Post, or from the start of the pandemic onwards, the board has met remotely, using Teams. These meetings haven't been recorded and haven't been posted online, so there was always a desire at some point to allow public access to meetings. And as I said at the start of the meeting, we're now able to record and post meetings on a YouTube channel, and we should be able to, for the next meetings, also record and live stream. But that depends on how the board wishes to manage its meetings. The options would be to return to fully physical, to remain remote entirely, or of a hybrid in between. The board previously did, in discussions early in this year, indicate that the remote model worked for a lot of members because we come from different authorities. So for travel arrangements, convenience, that they preferred being able to meet remotely. But as I've kind of finalised in the final part of the report said, there's a number of considerations for the board just now. I think there are benefits in meeting face to face, but there's also benefits in meeting remotely. And on top of that, the thing that we need to consider is the public health situation. At the time of writing, I think the COVID situation's worsened, and we're obviously nowhere near where we were 2020, the back end of 2021, but it still is a consideration for a lot of people. So this is really to ask the board to agree the dates and then to decide how it wishes to meet for those 2 dates. If you wish to meet remotely or whatever it is, we would still, for the 2023 programme, ask the board to make a decision for that going forward. So this is just for the next 2 meetings.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Brian. Just to kick things off, if we could maybe just try and agree the future dates for meetings first, and then we can have a discussion regarding whether we go for face-to-face or hybrid or just purely online. Can we agree that, David, sorry, you want to come in?
I'm happy to agree the dates.
Okay. Thanks, David. That's the dates agreed. Can I just ask for views from members regarding how we take forward future meetings? For myself, from my own perspective, I think a hybrid facility would be the best way forward, but I'm open to persuasion. David,
Well,
you want to?
I got my hand up. I don't think we should make that decision until September, when we know where we are with COVID, because we just don't know what's going to happen come the autumn, and it's just for such an event. I prefer face to face, but wait and see.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. David, you were wanting in, then Elaine.
Yeah, I think hybrid, and then for members that want to come in, they can do so. I'm quite happy remotely. We've also got to consider the cost of fuel and the environment as well, which plays a factor as well. So remote sort of ticks these boxes. So,
okay. Elaine?
I'm happy with hybrid. I do agree that meetings are better face-to-face, without a shadow of a doubt. But in the circumstances that we have or may have, I'm happy to go along with hybrid.
Okay, thanks for that, Elaine. Who's next? Kenny?
Yep. Firstly, can I apologise for coming out of the meeting earlier on? I just lost my internet signal altogether. However, go back to this question here. I think we've got to look at hybrid. I mean, the points have already been covered there: the cost of fuel, the fluidity of this virus. It just seems to be changing from day to day, and I think until we can get that nailed down, I think we'd be crazy to come down there and say, yes, we'll definitely meet face to face, because that can make the situation worse. So I would definitely go for a hybrid.
Thanks, Kenny. Gerry, you're next.
I think hybrid sounds like the better option, in as much as we have to be mindful also of the transparency element of it. Do we have the infrastructure to actually record face-to-face meeting and put that out to the public afterwards? So if we have the facility for some of us being online, then surely it works, and we can facilitate that. If we can't, I think if we're talking about face-to-face, which I suspect we're not at this point, if we were talking about that, we'd have to actually consider how we were going to make ourselves available to the public. So at this point in time, I'm sitting with hybrid, but I want to ensure their transparencies, accessibility.
Thanks for that, Gerry. Bryan, you're next.
I'm all for a hybrid, especially down the line. Maybe for the remainder of the year, we maybe, at least for the September, we stick with purely online, and then we can look at it for 2023 onwards. Just gives us some time and a wee bit more to think about how things are going with situation with COVID, with the fuel prices, and then bring it up later on, maybe in the November meeting, how we're going to do it fully for 2023.
Thanks for that, Bryan. I don't see any other indications from members to speak. Or, oh, yep, David.
Sorry, Convener, just one other point. If it's a hybrid, that allows us to have less people in the building at once, because we've got to consider the officers and staff as well. We maybe have an option of going in, but they don't. So obviously, if we minimise the amount of people in the building, that helps as well. Okay.
Thanks, David. I think as well we have to remember that home working doesn't suit everybody, so we need to take that into account as well. Bryan, I think there's possibly a consensus that we go down the lines of a hybrid situation. If I'm wrong, please let me know, but I think just reading between the lines and taking everybody's comments into account, I think that's what we're aiming for. Bryan?
I think so. No, I think that you're correct, Convener. I just want to, I've had conversations with Pete and we're pretty confident we can run a hybrid meeting, so we would have members in that we can have members in physically, members that join on remote, that they can also be live stream and recorded. So I'm just kind of looking to Pete just to double check that I've understood it correct, and if that's the case, fine.
Yes, that is the case. It is just a fixed camera within the boardroom here, so you just get an overall view of the table, but there are microphones and everything around, so the recording quality is good, and there's the large screen where you can see remote members. I'm more than happy to demonstrate maybe to the convener, vice convener, deputy convener if they want to see it before making a final decision on it, but the situation's there, we can record the meeting and we can operate a hybrid model.
Thanks for that, Peter. I'm quite happy to have a look at the system just to see what's involved. Will that be in place for the next board meeting then?
It's up and running. We use it for our management team meetings where attendees from Clackmannanshire Council dial in remotely for us.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks very much, Peter. Any other comments from members at this point? Nope, there's no indications that I can see. Can I just thank everybody for their attendance this morning? We've had a really good discussion regarding the agenda, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next board meeting. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Well, an excellent closing time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. Good afternoon, cheers.